Hi, in this video we're going to look at transparency using alpha on models and exporting them into the PhyreEngine, and I'm going to cover a couple of extra bits as well to do with metalness. But first off, we've got this simple object here which is a fender, and it has two materials on it. One of them is like a basic metal material which is applied to all the areas that don't have alpha or don't need alpha. We can preview that by going up to Hypershade, and we can find this is this material, fender matte. If we right click on here and go to select objects with material, then it will select the faces that have that material applied. So if you just wanted to apply a material to an object in Maya, you can just select the faces that you want to apply this to and apply them to it, and it's as simple as that. Maya doesn't really have a sub-object material the same way Max does. It just allows you to apply things directly to faces, and it just has that material applied to them. So that's that part, and the other part is the Fender Alpha matte, which is basically similar kind of material, but it has an alpha channel. So you can see here it's got alpha on it. So if we right click and select objects with that material, you can see that it's only attached to those. So one thing I would say is, maybe if you can plan to do it this way, then to separate out the alpha material and the non-alpha parts is probably a good way to go. You can't always do that, so don't worry about it too much, but you know, there are always limitations with dealing with transparency. It's something that game engines always struggle with, and PhyreEngine's no exception, and we'll look at some of those issues. But this way you can basically separate out the bits that definitely don't need, you know, expensive alpha transparency, and the bits that do. So it seems logical to do it that way if you can do it. So this material, the one with the alpha, is set up much the same way as you normally would do it. The alpha channel, the bit that the mask that basically tells it what is see-through and what's not see-through, is stored in the alpha channel of the albedo texture. So if we just look at that, so this is the albedo texture for that, and as you can see, it's just, you know, it's a grey metal colour. That's the idea. And then in the alpha channel of that, we have a mask. The white parts being the parts that are meant to show through, and the black parts are the bits that are meant to be see-through. So essentially, this is this alpha matte basically doesn't blend at all. It's just either on or off. And if you're going to use alpha, I would advise, where possible, this is the type of map that you would use, where you're not trying to blend things out, just because it will work better, and obviously it's the cheapest type of alpha you can have, and in most instances it's usually what you actually want. So that's just saved out as a DDS, and if we go back into here, the only things you really need to do are, you need to set transparency on the material switches. So under this, so this is just the RVPBR shader, set transparency, and that basically will invoke this. So that's it with it switched off. You can just see it's just a material. And the other thing as well is that we've got rendered double-sided on, so you can see, or off, so you can see that these back faces currently are getting nothing. And if we wanted to, obviously when we're using alpha, this will be a bigger deal because we're likely to be able to see those back faces. So if we select render double-sided, we can now see the other side, and if we select transparency, then we can see both sides, and that kind of makes more sense. So they're two things that you'd want to switch on. Don't be deceived, because if you switch render double-sided off and you look at the back of this, you can say, well, it's still double-sided, but when it exports, it won't be. So make sure it's switched on. And one of the other issues you're probably going to have is, you can see it here, is that the roughness or the specular is basically not coming through on the alpha. So this is one of the issues that we've got. Now, one of the ways around it, or one of the ways to try and improve that situation, is to play with this alpha threshold value. If I put a value of, say, 0.2, then what it will do is it will start to clamp some of that stuff out, or get rid of it, mask some of that stuff out. And you can see that it's still working. The alpha's working, and you're getting the roughness coming through as well. You just need to be careful, because as you can see, it starts to kind of mip out and disappear into the distance. So this is quite twitchy, but you can play with the alpha threshold there. And that's more or less it for setting up the alpha. It will work. I'm going to export it so you can see some of the issues that you're going to get in the previewer, but it's alpha, it's transparency, you know, it's not many game engines deal with this particular thing very well. The other thing I just wanted to point out, just because it's unique to this object and is something that you may come across, is that if you've got objects which are completely metal, they have no other part to them that is not metal, you don't need a metalness map. You can actually just go to this material metallicity, and you can turn the slider up to 1, and that will basically make the whole thing made of metal, or respond as if it's made of metal, without having to go down here and go to this texture metallicity. The texture metallicity channel is basically if you need to use a texture, so that's, you need to use a mask to say some things are metal and some things are not. So actually, if you turn this material metallicity up to 1, that basically makes it fully metal, and you don't need to have a map to do it. So that will save you a bit of effort and a bit of memory. So, and is there anything else I can think of in here? Yeah, and then the usual stuff like your material specular color. Make sure you've got that set, because if you set this to pink, it will, it will change the color of your. And maybe that's what you want. So again, you can tint things if you need to as well, but we're not going to do that. So with all that set up and ready to go, we've got our two materials both set up the same way. One's got transparency, one hasn't. I'm just going to export that, and we can have a look at it. So I'm just going to export mesh, and we'll have a look at it in the previewer. Okay, so I've just copied these things across into the previewer, and I'm just going to drop it onto the asset previewer and let it do its thing, and we'll come back when it's ready and we can have a look at it. Okay, so we haven't had any issues, which is good. So I'm just going to type P to see the PBR version of this, and we get our little previewer, and I'm just going to right click and zoom in, and let's see what we've got. So this is our little fender, and as you can see from a distance, it's okay. We've got metalness, which is quite bright, which is partly to do with the HDR cube we're using, or light source we're using. But you can see that there's a slight halo in, but it will work okay from a distance, and we'll get the roughness coming through, and it works okay. And it's double-sided, which is good, and our metalness works as it should. So it kind of works. Now, one of the issues we're going to have with the alpha is you get these sorts of areas where we've got alpha that is basically, so here you go, so you can start to see this artifacting, and this is just an issue with the fact that we've got a material that is using alpha that is double-sided, and is also trying to then look at something else that has got alpha on it, and that is double-sided as well, and you're going to get these kind of weird little issues. There's not a lot you can do about them. Don't don't try and fix them. They're just part of the joy. So yeah, so that's just something to watch out for. It's not you doing it wrong. You can see this artifact in here. It's just what it is. But there you go. That's kind of alpha in its most basic sense working. Yeah, good luck with it. Cheers.